Greetings, welcome to the Citizen exclusive video host Mpoki Thompson. Today's conversation has been a long time coming. In Dar es Salaam, I am with the founder and CEO of Nala, the fintech company that's too popular in Tanzania, East Africa, Africa, and the globe. Benjamin Fernandes. Benjamin, welcome to the Citizen exclusive.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, it's great to see you in Tanzania. We don't see you that often. So today's conversation is going to unpack a lot. The impact that Nala has had in the fintech space in this part of the world, and the vision that you have for the company, but also for the audiences to understand Nala's vision. Now, to start off from the beginning, I want you to tell us a little bit more about how Nala started, because when it initially entered in the market, it aimed to make access to mobile payments and financial services a bit more efficient. Now, can you tell us what challenge and what solution were you trying to bring into the market?
Cool. Yeah, I think that was
2017 was when I started building Nala. Built, failed, built, failed, built, failed. By April 2018, we launched a USSD app that would enable people to aggregate multiple wallets. So if you had Vodacom, Tigo, Airtel, or CNB Bank or NMB Bank, whatever bank you use, we would aggregate all the wallets so you could see your total balance, but also be able to transact
directly from there. And all it was doing was running USSD codes in the background of an Android application. That was it. So that was the first product we had launched, and it didn't do well, quite frankly. I did get a cease and desist letter from the largest telecom in Tanzania. Okay. And I remember because we were number one in the Play Store. Yeah. And after 3 months, they sent me a letter telling me to shut down. They said we were stealing customers' PINs and all these other claims just to get us to shut down. And it was quite frustrating as an innovator here. I remember the central bank calling me in and telling me that we were, doing these things that weren't allowed. And I was explaining, no, this is how the technology works. Yeah. And it was quite a challenging time because I think I was 24, 25 years old when you're just doing that. Well, that was the beginning, the first version of what Nala was.
Okay, so when you entered the market, you disrupted the market. And sort of like what we're seeing today, some of the banks claim that telecom companies are entering into the space of, a money transaction. So now we were looking at telecom pointing fingers at you, disrupting the market, eating into them, their audiences. Now, can you tell us about that pivot? Because when you launched that mobile management app, later you had to pivot into remittances and international transaction. Can you tell us that gradual process? How did you go about now pivoting the entire focus of the business?
Yeah, I think pivoting was hard, because nobody wants to, nobody likes failing. Otherwise, everything is a waste of time, right? And
so making the decision to even shift from domestic payments
to international money transfer. I'd never lived in England before. And, during the pandemic, during COVID, we started to see an increase in international money transfer. So people were sending more and more money digitally versus cash on planes. So before, people used to send money, oh, Mpoki, you're going from England to Tanzania, take some cash, give it to my grandma. Yeah. That was a heavier amount, but they started to see a transition of switch to digital because of COVID, and people couldn't fly frequently as much, not just in Tanzania, but in many countries around the world. So there are two patterns I'm seeing globally. One, the population growth rate of Asian markets and African markets. Africa, 1.2 billion people today, going to be 2.5 billion by 2050. It's going to be the largest population for global workforce. And you look at Asia, it's quite similar patterns. And so because the population is growing, it also means the number of people leaving is also going to increase. Yeah. So India has about 1.6 million people leaving India every single year for opportunities abroad, whether it's in Europe, Middle East, or America. Africa has a similar population, about 1.1 million people leave Africa every single year. So if you look at the trends of where that goes, when people migrate, so does money getting sent home, but so does trade. And so that was the bet, and it's okay, do you know what, maybe if we bet on where migration is going to happen and trade, we can try, but it was out of the blue, more just trying to do something, and never expected to get far, but it was you know what, we'll do our best shot, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, we give it our best shot.
Okay. Now, listening to the narrative about how you first started, you established in Tanzania, something in the Tanzanian market, but then now you mentioned you started getting cease and desist letters, and also the central bank getting involved. Now, that brought on the fact that inevitably you had to focus in another market, basically. And there has been conversation that Nala is not based in Tanzania, the headquarters are in Kenya, or the headquarters are abroad, despite the fact that the founder, the CEO, is Tanzanian. Can you perhaps explain to us that narrative, and where are Nala's headquarters?
Nala has no headquarters, because if you go by revenue, it'd be the United States. If you go by number of employees, it'd be the UK. If you go by operational roles, it'd be Nairobi or India. So, we operate in many countries around the world. We operate in 11 countries in Africa today, 4 countries in Asia, 19 countries in Europe and the US. So, okay, there's many countries. So for most tech companies, okay, what is headquarters defined as, right? Yeah. And so I think there's an incorrect narrative about that. Like, I see some of the people posting on Twitter sometimes here and there, oh, but your headquarters aren't even in Tanzania. We don't have a headquarters. And I have never, as Benjamin Fernandes said verbally, hey, my headquarters is in Kenya. Okay. And so I think there's a lot of misinterpretation, including by the citizen, that I've told him about, which was incorrect misreporting. And I think the challenge is many people came and started saying, oh yeah, you don't have your headquarters in your own home country. Our first business is registered here. Our first entity ever is registered in Tanzania. We have a PSP license by the Central Bank of Tanzania. Yeah. So we still operate here. Okay. It's not, what's the definition of headquarters? Do we still send money to Tanzania? Yeah, we still send money. We're probably one of the largest remittance companies sending money to Tanzania. Today in Africa, we work over $1 billion a year, just continent. Well over that, right? So if you look at the contribution to the local economy, we contribute significantly and quite a lot. The telecoms know how much money we bring them every single month, and all of them, so do the banks. So I think there was an incorrect narrative around that. And, for me, it's you build, and the reason, maybe that's follow-up question is, why do you have a Nairobi office? Yeah. We have a Nairobi office for many reasons. Number one is the UK was where we were starting. And the first country that gave us permission to send money to it was actually Kenya. Okay. So that is true. Okay. And so while I was waiting for permission from the Central Bank of Tanzania, we got our approvals in Kenya. So
how long did you have to wait for the Tanzanian to give you approval?
Tanzania probably took 1.5 years.
Okay, in Kenya?
2 months or 3 months.
Wow.
So, as a tech company, time is your enemy. Indeed. And so speed wins in tech companies. So you don't have time. And so when you need to get something live to prove that the business model can maybe work, you need to just ship and get something live. So we said, let's start with the product going live in Kenya. So we started doing transfers from the UK to Kenya while I'm waiting for my Tanzanian approval. And then now you have to think about it. Now your Kenyan user base is growing in the UK. So now you have to support the Kenyan audience. Now you have to build a customer support center. Now, remember, with customer support for a cross-border payments company, you have to support English, while also other local languages. So if I start building a customer support center in Tanzania, where English prevalence is not as high as Kenya, or where the mandatory literacy rate for English, for quality English, is very different from Tanzania, that's the truth. And the cost of hiring people to speak that level of English was going to be very expensive compared to hiring in Kenya, where it's a lot more normalized and everywhere around and more available. So I think that was one of the factors. First one was market factors that were out of my control, so where we got first approvals. Second factor was our customer base, which was primarily Kenyans in the UK. Third factor was English as we think about scaling. So imagine if I launch UK to Nigeria and I have Tanzanians responding on customer support versus Kenyans who natively grow up speaking English so I have to think about what's best for the business at that point. And so initially I was like, okay, cool, let's put some operational people on customer support, payment operations in Nairobi, and let's see how it grows. And slowly the team started growing from there.
Okay, so based on that, it means that inevitably, regardless whether you would have gotten the approval much earlier from the central bank, your primary customer base wouldn't have been in Tanzania, just on the dynamics that you've mentioned about the language barrier and whatnot.
Yeah, well, I think initially because you get your approval there, you start okay, when you build a company, you focus on your customer, right? So what is your customer's biggest need? What is your customer's biggest want? Like, how are you building the business around that customer just to survive as a company, right? And so if Tanzania had given me approval first, like, yeah, we probably would have had more people working in Tanzania and a larger office in Tanzania for sure.
Okay.
But, and maybe over time, we would probably able to have, okay, maybe open a Kenya office because English and other things like that, and also connectivity. Regional connectivity. There's more flights to Nairobi than there is to Dar es Salaam.
True.
And so if you think about regional connectivity, there's a reason why Microsoft, IBM, Facebook, Google all have offices in Nairobi and don't have them in Tanzania. And so if you think about technology and regions around the world, if you look at Africa, right, there's 3 regional hubs for tech. You have Nigeria, you have Egypt, you have Egypt, then you have Kenya, then you have South Africa, right? Those regions usually attract the most amount of funding and so on. And I do think English is a big restrictor in Tanzania because English is the language of trade, global trade. And it does hold us back massively as a region and as an economy. I know there's national pride, like in speaking Swahili, like I speak Swahili, but I think it does limit opportunities for us to trade with different people around the world and how people will trust us to do business with us. So if you look at that as a regional hub, if you look at the United States, you have Silicon Valley in California, you have New York, and then everything else is tier 2 or tier 3 cities. So like Dar es Salaam is not at that scale today. Does it have potential to get there? Yeah. Is our population size showing that potential for us to get there? Yeah, but is it there today? No.
Okay. Now, talking about that, the diaspora community. So recently, that has been a big topical issue in light of what's happening in the U.S., the Trump administration. So we're looking at the numbers, and in the year 2023, we saw a very dismal number of Tanzanians who had actually been granted immigrant and non-immigrant visas to the U.S. And then people were commenting that Tanzanians don't like traveling. So comparatively, when you look at markets such as Kenya with a wide diaspora community. Now, from a business perspective, you're in the fintech space, you offer solutions to cross-border transaction and remittances. How does that impact the flow of your business? And what's your opinion about the Tanzanian diaspora community and how it is set to grow?
Cool. So I like numbers. So let's look at numbers, right? So look at the size of the economy and the population size. Yes, we have a bigger population. Our economy is not bigger. Yeah. Kenya has a larger diaspora population who live abroad, much larger than Tanzania. No. Now let's look at Kenya specifically. Kenya's export value in 2023, according to the OECD, the same year that you mentioned, was $7 billion export, all exports in Kenya. Kenya's import value was $21 billion. So if Kenya imports $21 billion and exports $7 billion, there's a trade deficit that's right there that exists in the market, And so what's going to fill in that trade deficit of, $14 billion? Now, if you really think about it, Kenya's largest export in that 2023 was tea. And tea brought in $1.2 billion into Kenya. So the largest commodity that brought in the most cash into Kenya was tea. That's the country's largest export. Now, Kenyan diaspora abroad in the same year brought in $4 billion. So it reduces the country's deficit for the trade imbalance significantly. Right. So if the diaspora of Kenyans abroad bring in 4 times the country's largest export, which is tea, that should be its own ministry. Yeah. Because if you think about it, it brings in more dollars into the market, and all our markets in East Africa need dollars. All the markets in Africa need dollars. Where many of us are net. There's only one country in Africa that exports more than imports, and that's Cote d'Ivoire. But all of us are net import regions. So how do we also enable diaspora as Tanzanians who live abroad? How do we support them? How do we enable more trade to happen within these regions? Now, if you look at that number, $4 billion is Kenya's market size. Tanzania's $500 million. So if you look at growing in do you want 100% of a grape or 5% of a watermelon? If you think about it that way, it's the market is going to grow, and I hope it does grow in scale. But I think that those are some of the challenges where we have to look at is the moment you raise money from investors, they expect you to grow the business. Indeed. And they expect you to tackle and figure out markets that are big and try to play in the big markets, right? Yeah. And just transparently in the cross-border space, at least today, Tanzania is much smaller than Kenya so far. Now, does it have potential to be bigger? Absolutely. Do I think we need better trade relations and better immigration support? Absolutely. Do I think more Tanzanians abroad should start businesses? Absolutely. So I think there's opportunities like this that we need to look at as a country.
And then we are seeing the government taking initiative, for example, the new foreign policy that provides special status to the diaspora community. So it makes it a bit more easier for them to invest, to own property here in Tanzania. Perhaps has that been like a conversation among some of the people that you work with in terms of them sending more remittances to Tanzania and the regulatory restraint that was there? And now we're seeing how the government is also realizing the potential of the diaspora community. Is that a conversation in terms of how the regulations here are a bit limiting for them to actually participate in growing the economy?
Look, I know it's a sensitive topic, but I think Tanzania should enable dual citizenship.
Okay.
And I see this across all the markets we work in, right? So like Ugandans have dual citizenship, Kenyans have dual citizenship. Yes, there's so many countries that don't have dual citizenship, but I actually think dual citizenship enables more trade and investment back home. And I think because our economies and regions struggle without the dollars coming in, enabling dual citizenship builds more trust. And yes, special status is one thing, but how do we get Tanzanians globally building businesses more? What ways do we support them? And there's something that's tied to this, actually, even with visas and migration. I think we're sleeping on digital nomad visas here. If you look at countries like the UK, right? The UK has many visas. The visa I'm on is called Tech Nation. And it's like the UK initiated this initiative to enable them to become a tech-based country. So if you work in tech, if you have background in tech, they want you there. Why? Because they know you'll be able to earn money and stimulate the local economy in the tech industry. And so they think ahead, like, okay, if you're building software there, you're probably selling it there, you're probably earning revenue there, you're probably earning a salary there, you're going to spend it there, And I think initiatives like that, or the other thing the UK does is they have this like top 50 universities in the world. If you graduated from any of the top 50 universities in the world, you have, I think it's a 2-year visa you can automatically get when you apply for, and it gives you can stay in the UK for 2 years. Why? Because I think over time, talent is scarce, and what governments need to do and really lean into is like, how do you bring the best talent into our countries? Now, historical examples of this were Singapore. Singapore had a smaller economy than Tanzania 50 years ago. Singapore was irrelevant 50 years ago. None of us would talk about Singapore. But what they did is like, we don't have natural resources. How do we look at what the British have left us with and think about bringing the best people, the smartest talent into our market and stimulating the local economy from like services industry? And Singapore did an amazing job at that. And they completely, within 50 years, transformed the country. And so I think Tanzania needs to look at this directly and figure out how do we enable this for our local economies, and whether it's in Zanzibar and like building out a visa for people to be able to come to Zanzibar, but of a certain caliber. Regardless, when they come to Tanzania, they're still going to invest here. They're still going to use the money that they're earning here. And I think that will create a lot more movement of currencies, but also high quality individuals being surrounded, but also building businesses here locally.
Yeah, indeed.